It started at a dinner table I never should have gone to in the first place. My name's Henry. I'm 36 now, but this story takes place 2 years ago, when I was 34 and fresh off signing the divorce papers that closed a chapter I'd been clinging to for far too long. I was exhausted, emotionally hollowed out, and still doing that thing where you try to smile and pretend like everything's under control, like your life hasn't just been burned down to the foundation. I hadn't told my family yet. Not officially. They'd suspected something was up, sure. I'd stopped showing up to Sunday brunch. I wasn't wearing my wedding ring anymore, and I'd been dodging questions about where Amanda was for months. But this dinner was going to be the moment. I thought, maybe foolishly, that they'd show a little support, that they'd notice I looked thinner than usual, or that my hands shook when I reached for my water. I thought maybe someone would ask if I was okay. But this is my family we're talking about. My dad, Richard, is the kind of man who thinks emotion is a weakness you should beat out of yourself by age 10. He's old school in all the worst ways. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps despite being born into a trust fund. Men don't cry, unless it's at a football game. And your wife leaves, you must have done something to deserve it. My mom, Carol, is a professional enabler. She's never disagreed with my father out loud in her life, but she's mastered the art of passive-aggressive silence. And then there are my sisters, Emily and Tara, older than me by a few years, and always the golden girls. Straight-A students, married doctors, one house in the suburbs each, and matching labradoodles. They speak in tandem, like twins in a horror movie, even though they're 3 years apart. And me? I'm the youngest, the creative one, the dreamer, which was their polite way of saying I never did what they expected. I chose film over finance, started my own production company, and married Amanda, a woman they never really accepted because she had a tattoo and worked as a sculptor. It wasn't subtle either. Carol once pulled me aside during a Christmas party and asked if I was sure Amanda wasn't just with me for stability. I laughed at the time, brushed it off. But that comment stuck. Anyway, this dinner. It was a casual thing, just family, just catching up. Or so I thought. I hadn't planned to break the news until dessert, maybe over coffee, maybe when the table had relaxed a bit. But the moment I sat down, I knew something was off. Emily looked smug. Tara looked nosy. And my dad had that gleam in his eye he gets when he's gearing up for a lecture. So, he said, halfway through his steak, not even looking up from the plate. Where's Amanda? Still finding herself at that artist commune of hers. It was said like a joke, but his tone carried a bite. I paused, glanced at my mom, hoping she'd smooth it over. She just dabbed her mouth with a napkin and sipped her wine. I cleared my throat. We separated, I said quietly. A few months ago, the divorce finalized last week. And for a second, just a second, there was silence. I thought, naively, that it might be sympathy. A breath held in solidarity. But then my dad leaned back in his chair, shook his head, and laughed. Not a kind laugh. Not even a shocked laugh. A laugh like I'd just tripped in public and he wanted everyone to see. Well, he said, folding his arms behind his head, this just proves we were right about you all along. You've always been a quitter. I blinked. I didn't even know how to respond. My stomach dropped like I'd missed a stare. I looked at my sisters, half expecting at least one of them to jump in, to say something neutral, something sisterly. Instead, Tara snorted and said, I mean, you kind of give up on things when they get hard. You left that job in LA after 2 months, remember? And that documentary you never finished, Emily added, nodding like she was tallying up my failures. Didn't you lose money on that? Carol didn't say a word. She just offered a small, tight smile and shrugged, like, what can you do? I was stunned. I didn't say a word for the next 15 minutes. I just sat there, picking at my food, replaying the moment over and over again in my head like it might sound different if I heard it a second time. But it didn't. They really thought that. They thought I was a joke, a screw-up, the kind of person who brings their own misery and then complains about it when it inevitably falls apart. And here's the thing. Amanda and I didn't break up because I gave up. We fought hard. For years. We did therapy. We tried space. We tried reconnection retreats and marriage workshops and books and weekends away. But love isn't always enough, and sometimes, people just grow in different directions. She wanted a simpler life. No more city, no more late-night shoots, no more unpredictable schedules. And I couldn't give her that without killing the part of me that makes me feel alive. It wasn't a failure. It was survival. But try explaining that to a table full of people who've decided they already know who you are. By the end of dinner, my appetite was gone. I pushed my chair back without saying goodbye. Just stood up and walked out the front door while they kept talking like nothing happened. No one followed me. No one called. Not that night. Not the next day. It was like my pain was an inconvenience they were grateful to be rid of. That was the night I cut them all off. No big announcement. No dramatic confrontation. I just stopped answering texts. Stopped returning calls. Removed myself from the family group chat. Birthdays came and went. Holidays passed. I didn't show up. Didn't explain. If they wanted to treat me like I didn't matter, I figured I'd give them the courtesy of disappearing. But life has a way of moving on without permission. And sometimes, it gets better. And sometimes, it gets so much better, it scares them. I didn't expect silence to be so loud. After that dinner, I thought someone, anyone, might reach out. Not even to apologize, but to at least check in. To pretend they cared. But days turned into weeks, and not a single message came through. The family group chat kept buzzing with their usual nonsense. Emily sharing pictures of her daughter's piano recital, Tara gushing about some new yoga instructor, Dad ranting about the price of gas like it was a personal attack. But I stayed quiet. And no one seemed to notice I was gone. I didn't block them. I wanted to see. I wanted to witness just how little I mattered to them when I stopped putting in effort. I had always been the one chasing connection. I was the one who called first, who sent birthday gifts early, who remembered anniversaries, who drove 3 hours for Christmas even when Amanda and I were in the middle of a fight. I kept trying to prove I belonged in a family that never really opened the door. But after that dinner, I stopped trying. The first holiday after the fallout was Easter. Carol always hosted, and for years she'd guilt me into coming with the line. It's not really about religion, Henry, it's about family. I didn't respond to the invite. Not even with a no. I just ghosted it. And when I saw the photos later, everyone lined up in pastel colors, holding matching wine glasses in the backyard, I wasn't surprised to see my absence didn't even earn a mention. What did surprise me was the voicemail from my dad 3 days later. Not an apology. Not even a hello. Just this gruff, clipped message. You missed Easter. Again. Don't know what point you're trying to make, but it's childish. Family shows up. Grow up. Click. I remember listening to that on my morning walk, just laughing. I laughed out loud, standing alone at the edge of a pond, because he had the nerve to call me childish after that dinner. After everything. That laugh turned into something darker though. Something tight in my chest. Something like rage. I saved the voicemail. I don't know why. Maybe for moments like this, when I start to doubt myself and need a reminder of why I walked away. Anyway, life moved on. Mine at least. I threw myself into work. I started shooting again. Not client projects, but personal stuff, documentaries, short films, experimental pieces. Things that made me feel like myself again. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I met Claire. Claire was nothing like Amanda. Where Amanda was soft-spoken and introspective, Claire was loud and funny and told stories with her whole body. She'd been through her own mess. A nasty engagement that ended with her ex draining their shared account and ghosting her 2 weeks before the wedding. So we bonded. Slowly. Carefully. We weren't looking to fix each other. We were just tired of pretending to be fine alone. I didn't tell my family about her. Not out of shame, just out of protection. I didn't want their opinions infecting something good. I'd made that mistake once. But word got out eventually. Emily ran into us at a local bookstore one afternoon. I was holding Claire's hand. We were laughing about something stupid, probably a dog in a sweater. And there Emily was, standing next to her husband, frozen like she'd just seen a ghost. She didn't say hello. She didn't wave. She just stared. And then, a week later, I got a text. From Mom. Heard you're seeing someone new. Hope you're not making another impulsive decision. We only want what's best for you. I stared at that message for 10 minutes before deleting it. I didn't reply. What could I say? That Claire made me laugh in ways I hadn't in years. That she read my scripts and actually gave feedback. That she showed up at 2 a.m. with soup when I had the flu and stayed up all night watching bad horror movies with me. They didn't want what was best for me. They wanted control. Approval. Obedience. That summer, I posted a photo of Claire and me on a hiking trail. Nothing special. Just a selfie with her smiling and me looking red-faced and exhausted. The caption was something cheesy like, she made me climb a mountain. I survived. Within an hour, Tara had commented, already replacing Amanda? That was fast. Then Emily chimed in, wow, didn't realize you were that kind of guy. And then my mom liked both comments. I didn't respond, but I archived the post. And I blocked them all. Claire noticed. Of course she did. She asked if everything was okay, and I told her the truth. Not the whole history, but enough. Enough for her to understand that my family didn't know how to love without conditions. That I wasn't ready to let them ruin something that made me happy. She didn't push. Just took my hand and said, you're not alone this time. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The real breaking point came that fall. Claire and I had moved in together by then. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Her lease was up, my place was closer to both our jobs, and we liked falling asleep on the couch in the middle of movies. One night, we were rearranging furniture when my doorbell rang. It was Emily. She looked different, like she'd been crying, or maybe holding it in for too long. Her tone was all fake warmth. Hi. Wow, it's been forever. She acted like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't spent the last year in silence. I stood in the doorway, not inviting her in. Claire stayed in the background, respectful, but present. And Emily's eyes flicked to her, and then back to me, lips tightening. I just wanted to talk, she said. You've been really distant. Everyone's been worried. That made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so absurd. Worried. I repeated. Really? Is that what Dad was when he left me a voicemail calling me childish? She waved a hand like she was swatting away a gnat. You know how he is. He didn't mean it like that. Oh no. I said. What about you? Or Tara? Or Mom? Emily had the audacity to look hurt. We were just trying to help. You were making bad choices, Henry. We thought if we didn't say something, you'd end up alone again. And I guess that's what you wanted, right? I said, my voice rising. So you could sit around and say, see? Told you so. She blinked fast. We're family. We love you. No, you don't. I said, stepping back. You love control. You love being right. You love each other. But me? You've never treated me like I belonged. Then I shut the door. She stood there for a full minute before I heard her footsteps retreat. I thought that would be the end of it. But 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. From my parents. A formal invitation to a family reconciliation dinner. Handwritten. Stiff. Like a ceasefire proposal in a war no one admitted they started. And at the bottom, in my mother's looping cursive. We miss you. Let's move on from the past. I should have ignored it. But part of me, a small, stupid, stubborn part, thought maybe this was the moment. Maybe they realized what they'd done. Claire warned me. Only go if you're sure it won't break you again. I told her I was fine. I wasn't. Because that night, everything finally snapped. And they crossed a line I could never forgive. I knew I shouldn't have gone. I told myself it would be different this time. That a handwritten invitation meant something. That maybe the silence had settled into guilt. That maybe they missed me. Not just the version of me who nodded and smiled and paid the dinner bill. But I should have listened to Claire. I should have trusted that gut feeling in the back of my mind. The one that whispered, they haven't changed. They never will. The family reconciliation dinner was held at my parents' house. Same big, cold house I grew up in. The one with polished floors and furniture no one ever sat on. It was weird walking up those steps again. The porch light was on. The same chime echoed when I rang the doorbell. And for a moment, I was 17 again, coming home after missing curfew, bracing for Dad's silent disapproval and Mom's disappointed sigh. Carol answered the door with that tight, rehearsed smile she always wore when company was over. She leaned in for a hug, stiff and brief, then stepped aside. I walked into a house that felt like a museum. Nothing had changed. Not the placement of the fake flowers on the dining table, not the bowl of decorative fruit in the kitchen, not even the family photo on the wall from 10 years ago. Amanda was still in it. Still smiling. I don't know why, but that hit me. Harder than I expected. Tara and Emily were already there. Tara was pouring wine. Emily was setting the table, humming to herself like this was just another Sunday dinner. Dad was sitting in his chair, the one he never let anyone else touch, watching some sports recap on mute. No one looked surprised to see me. No one looked relieved. We sat down to eat, and for a while, it was quiet. Forced small talk. Emily asked about work. Tara mentioned some new vacation home she and her husband had just bought as an investment. Mom passed around the roast chicken and asked if I was still with that girl Claire. That girl. I corrected her. Claire. My partner. Yes. Oh, she said. You've been moving pretty fast, haven't you? I didn't reply. Just kept chewing. Then Dad leaned back and let out a sigh like he'd been waiting for the moment all night. So, he said, let's talk about what happened. I looked up. You cut off your family, he said. Over a few words. Over some jokes at dinner. Jokes? Is that what you call it? I asked. Emily chimed in. Henry, we didn't mean to hurt you. You were going through a tough time. We were just being honest. Tara nodded. And you do have a pattern, you know? You get emotional. You shut people out. You don't follow through. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so predictable. They hadn't brought me here to reconcile. They brought me here to gaslight me. To rewrite the narrative. To paint themselves as the reasonable ones and me as the overreactive black sheep. I came here thinking maybe something had changed, I said. But you just wanted a chance to tell me I was wrong. Again. No one's saying you were wrong, Mom said, setting down her fork. We're just saying you could have handled things better. That was it. That was the moment. I stood up, took my napkin, and dropped it on the plate. I don't need this, I said. Not anymore. And then, for the first time in my life, I walked out without looking back. That night, I hit what I thought was rock bottom. Not because I missed them. Not because I regretted anything I said. But because I realized I never really had a family. Not in the way people talk about when they say, my family has my back. I had people who shared my blood and kept a scoreboard. People who demanded loyalty without offering love. Who called my boundaries drama and my independence failure. That night, I sat in my car for a long time. Just staring at the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt hollow. Like everything I'd believed about love and connection had been carved out of me. Claire stayed up waiting for me. When I walked through the door, she didn't ask what happened. She just pulled me into a hug and said, "You're home now." And that's when I realized rock bottom wasn't the dinner. It was before that. It was every time I let their words make me question my worth. Every time I bit my tongue instead of defending myself. Every time I lowered my voice so I wouldn't upset the room. That night was the turning point. The beginning of the rise. It didn't happen overnight. Healing never does. But it started with little things. I went to therapy. Real therapy. Not the kind you lie through to get a pat on the back. I found a guy named Dr. Ellis, former artist turned psychologist. He got it. He understood what it meant to be the weird one in a family obsessed with image. He helped me unpack years of shame I didn't even know I was carrying. Helped me stop flinching every time I made a mistake, expecting someone to say, "Told you so." Claire and I traveled more. Not to post pictures, not to show off, just to live. We took a road trip up the coast and slept in cheap motels with broken vending machines and sand in the sheets. We hiked. We laughed. We talked about dreams we'd both buried. She wanted to open a ceramic studio. I wanted to make a film just for me. So I did. I spent that winter shooting a short film. No budget. Just friends, favors, and borrowed lights. It was raw, messy, personal. A story about a man trying to rewrite the narrative his family wrote for him. I didn't tell anyone what it was really about, but it was mine. And when it premiered at a tiny indie festival that spring and got a standing ovation, I felt something crack open inside me. Not pride. Not vindication. Peace. I wasn't who they said I was. And I never had been. Claire was there that night, holding my hand. After the screening, a stranger came up to me, some guy in his 20s, nervous, awkward, and said, "That felt like you wrote it about my life." And I realized something. Maybe that pain had a purpose. Maybe walking away had made room for something real. Not just love, but meaning. Freedom. I started turning down work that didn't excite me. Said no to projects that drained me. Started teaching workshops instead. Sharing what I'd learned. Giving other dreamers the space I never had growing up. Meanwhile, the silence from my family turned into noise. Tara sent an email. Then another. Then a voice message saying how immature it was for me to keep ignoring them, especially with Dad getting older. Emily reached out through an old mutual friend, asking if Claire and I would consider starting fresh. And then came the kicker. Mom sent a card. No note. Just a photo. A family photo. Them, standing in front of the house. Dad, Tara, Emily, their husbands, even the grandkids. And in the center, a gap. Like someone had been cropped out. On the back of the card, in her careful script, "There's always room if you decide to come back." Claire saw it before I did. She handed it to me, eyes unreadable. I stared at it for a long time. Then I tore it in half. Because I wasn't going back. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit their table anymore. And yet, they weren't done. Because just as Claire and I were starting to talk about marriage, just as life was finally feeling mine, they pulled one last trick. Something so manipulative, so public, it could have unraveled everything I'd built if I hadn't been stronger. I didn't plan to get revenge, not at first. When I finally cut off contact, it wasn't some calculated move. It was survival. A line in the sand. I was done trying to belong somewhere I never fit. I was done bleeding myself dry so people who claimed to love me could stay comfortable in their version of the truth. And for a while, I really did try to move on. To let it go. But they didn't let me. They couldn't. See, people like my family don't just want you to fall in line, they need it. It keeps their fragile little ecosystem intact. Without the scapegoat, the black sheep, the emotional one, they're forced to look at themselves. And that's something they've spent their entire lives avoiding. It started with whispers. Claire heard from a mutual acquaintance, an old college friend of Tara's, that my name had come up at some brunch. Apparently, Emily had been saying I was spiraling, that Claire was a rebound, and that I was clearly still not over Amanda. Claire laughed it off at first, but when it happened again, this time with someone from the film festival circuit, it wasn't so funny anymore. One of the festival coordinators pulled me aside and asked, "Hey, man, everything okay with your family?" Emily said something about a breakdown. I stared at him. "What kind of breakdown?" I asked. He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't know. Just, she said you've been kind of unstable since the divorce. That your last film was like a cry for help." I thanked him, excused myself, and went outside to breathe. Unstable. A cry for help. It wasn't enough for them to exclude me. Now they wanted to poison everything I'd built. Subtly. Quietly. Just enough to raise questions, to cast doubt, to undermine me in spaces where I finally felt like I was thriving. That's when the fire started to build. Not the kind that burns you up from the inside, but the kind that sharpens you, focuses you, the kind that makes you dangerous. Claire and I were planning our wedding quietly by then. Just the two of us. No big announcements, no save the dates. We weren't trying to hide it. We were just protecting it. Every time we talked about venues or playlists or honeymoon spots, I felt like I was building something sacred. Something no one could touch. But then, out of nowhere, Carol called. She never called. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year. I didn't answer, of course, but she left a voicemail. Her voice was syrupy, like she was reading from a script. Hi, sweetheart. We heard some exciting news through the grapevine. A wedding? Oh, Henry. I hope this means we're finally turning a corner. We'd love to be part of it. Please don't let old wounds ruin something so important. Family is family. Claire was the one who played it. I was too angry to hear it directly. She just looked at me, shook her head, and said, "They think they can talk their way into this." I didn't respond right away. I needed to think. And the more I thought, the clearer it became. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted a photo op. They wanted to show up in their Sunday best, smile for the camera, and pretend like everything was fine. Like they'd always supported me. Like they weren't the reason I almost walked away from my entire life 2 years ago. That's when the idea began to form. Not revenge in the traditional sense. No firebombs. No dramatic scenes. Just the truth. Delivered at the right time, in the right way, where they couldn't hide from it. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted to expose them. So I started planning. First step, gather everything. I went back through my old messages, voicemails, emails, every piece of communication I had from the past few years. The voicemail from Dad calling me childish. Tara's Instagram comment about me replacing Amanda. Emily's gossip at the bookstore. The Christmas card with the crop photo. Mom's guilt-laced emails. I archived it all. Organized it. Created a digital folder labeled The Rewrite. Then I looped in Claire. She was hesitant at first. She didn't want me to get pulled back into their drama. But once she saw how deep the manipulation went, how calculated it all really was, she understood. She even helped me gather more context. She spoke to mutuals, compared dates, pulled screenshots. It became our quiet little mission. Next step, prepare the guest list. We decided on a small ceremony. No more than 40 people. Just close friends, chosen family, and colleagues who'd become more like siblings than my actual ones ever were. I sent out individual invitations by hand. Wrote personal notes in each. But when it came time to consider whether to invite anyone from them, I paused. Claire asked gently one night, "Do you want them there?" I shook my head. No, but I want them to know why they're not. So I started writing letters. Not invitations, statements. Each one was addressed personally. To Mom. To Dad. To Emily. To Tara. I didn't rant. I didn't insult. I just told the truth. I wrote about that dinner. How they dismissed my pain, mocked my divorce, called me a quitter. I wrote about the silence afterward. About how no one checked in, not even once. I wrote about their comments online. Their gossip. Their fake reconciliation attempt that ended in blame shifting and gaslighting. I wrote about the card. The photo. The hole in the middle of the picture where I used to be. And then I told them what the wedding would be. A celebration of love built on respect, on healing, on choice. And that's why they weren't invited. I didn't mail them yet. I waited. Because I had one more move to make. I called up an old friend, Julia, someone I'd worked with years ago on a documentary about family estrangement. She now ran a nonprofit that supported adult children of toxic families. She'd always told me, "If you ever want to tell your story, Henry, I'll make space for it." I said yes. We filmed a short piece. Just 10 minutes. Shot in a quiet studio, raw, intimate. I told my story, not naming names, not airing every detail, but speaking honestly about the shame of being the scapegoat, the exhaustion of being the peacemaker, the grief of letting go of people who never really saw you. It went live on the nonprofit's YouTube channel 3 weeks before the wedding. It didn't go viral. That wasn't the point. But it did reach the right people. I know, because 2 days after it went up, I got an email from Emily. Just one line. "Unbelievable. You aired our dirty laundry to strangers." No apology. No reflection. Just offense. That's when I knew I'd struck a nerve. Perfect. So I mailed the letters. Each one in a black envelope. No return address. Inside, a printed copy of the piece I'd written. No handwritten note. No signature. Just the truth. The day before the wedding, I received one last message. It was from Mom. A voicemail. "You've humiliated this family, Henry. Whatever you think we did, whatever version of events you've created in your head, you're wrong. I hope you enjoy your little performance tomorrow. Just know, when it falls apart, we won't be here to pick up the pieces." Claire and I listened to it together. She looked at me and said, "They're panicking." And I realized she was right. Because the power wasn't in the event. It was in the choice. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. And the next day, when we walked down that aisle, when I saw Claire smiling at me like I was the safest place in the world, I knew I hadn't just escaped something toxic. I'd built something better. But I wasn't done yet. Because after the wedding came the fallout. And what they did next, that was their biggest mistake. Because they tried to weaponize the one thing they thought I still wanted. My name. My legacy. My story. And I had to remind them. I'm not the scared kid at the dinner table anymore. I'm the man who walked away and built a life worth envying. And now Now it was time to make sure they never rewrote that truth again. I didn't expect them to show up. Not physically, anyway. Not after the letters. Not after the video. I thought maybe, they'd finally get the message and slink off to wherever people like them go when they realize they're no longer the center of someone's orbit. But narcissism doesn't fade quietly. 3 days after the wedding, while Claire and I were still away on our honeymoon, a cabin tucked into the mountains, no signal, no noise. I turned on my phone and was greeted by a flood of texts, missed calls, and notifications. Apparently, Emily had posted something. A photo collage. At first glance, it looked like a tribute. Pictures of us as kids, family vacations, awkward prom photos, even my graduation shot. Her caption read, "No matter how far you run, we'll always be family. Congratulations to my baby brother Henry on tying the knot. Even if we weren't invited, we're still proud of you. Hashtag family first, hashtag unconditional love." There were hundreds of comments. Most were generic well wishes from her friends. Some, however, were confused. A few asked why she hadn't been at the wedding. One even said, "Didn't Henry go no contact with you guys?" But the post wasn't the worst part. She tagged Claire. Claire, who had never interacted with Emily once online. Claire, who had already blocked my family on everything. Now she was being dragged into their web, with strangers commenting on her page, some praising her, others, clearly from my family's circle, subtly suggesting she'd isolated me from my roots. Claire showed me one of the comments. It's a red flag when someone cuts off their entire family just because their new partner doesn't fit in. We sat on the couch of the cabin, surrounded by pine trees and stillness, staring at the screen. "This isn't just manipulation," she said quietly. "It's image control." And she was right. They weren't trying to reconnect. They were trying to rewrite history. They wanted to frame it like they'd always supported me. That I was the unstable one, the bitter one, the emotionally fragile little brother who pushed everyone away. And they were the saints, endlessly patient, endlessly forgiving, just waiting for me to come back home. But this time I was ready. I'd spent years letting them write the story, letting them shape the narrative, letting them control what people thought of me, of my choices, of my life. No more. I texted Julia. She answered immediately. "I was expecting this," she said. "You still have your account login?" I nodded. We got to work. The nonprofits page had grown since the first video. Their platform reached thousands now. People who had lived through similar stories, who recognized the patterns, the gaslighting, the emotional blackmail. Julia had always been clear. If I ever wanted to share more, they'd support it. So I wrote a follow-up. This time, I named them. Not with legal names. Not with photos. But with roles. The father who called me a quitter. The sister who called my healing a phase. The mother who cropped me out of the family. I told the full story, calmly, clearly, with timestamps and screenshots and direct quotes from the letters they'd sent me, the comments they'd made, the voicemails they'd left. I blurred out identifying info, anonymized faces, but I made sure every sentence was rooted in truth. And at the end of the video, I included a single line in white text on a black screen. They told me I was rewriting history. I'm just reading it out loud. The video dropped on a Wednesday morning. By Friday, it had 250,000 views. By Sunday, it had 500,000. But more than the views were the comments. Hundreds, thousands, of people sharing their stories. Estranged siblings, adult children of narcissists, survivors of toxic households. They didn't just believe me. They recognized me. The next week, I got an email from a journalist who ran a podcast about family estrangement. She wanted to feature the story. I said yes. Then a mid-sized digital publication reached out for an op-ed. I wrote it myself. I titled it, "The Cost of Being the Family Scapegoat, and Why I'm Not Paying It Anymore." My inbox filled with invitations to speak on panels, to contribute to articles, to lead workshops for creatives dealing with family rejection. I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was owning it. And the best part? There was nothing they could do. They couldn't sue. They weren't named. They couldn't call it a lie. I had the receipts. They couldn't shame me. They'd already tried. Eventually, they tried silence. Emily deleted the photo collage. Tara made her account private. My mother sent one last message. No words. Just a broken heart emoji. But the damage was done. Their narrative had collapsed. Mine had taken root. As for me, Claire and I bought a home just outside the city, a quiet, sunlit place with a backyard big enough for the dog we swore we wouldn't get, but did anyway. A mutt named Basil with one ear that never quite flops the same way twice. I still make films. More now than ever. But I also speak, teach, mentor. My inbox is full of people thanking me. For surviving. For walking away. For telling the truth. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't petty. It wasn't cruel. It was this. I lived well. I told the truth. And I never looked back. They say you can't choose your family. But you can choose your ending. And I chose mine. I chose peace.